Before seatbelt laws, before ID checks, before the internet tracked your every move. The 1970s in America felt wide open where neighbors looked out for each other. Kids roamed freely, and life seemed simple. But those freedoms we once took for granted would slowly slip away. In those days, neighborhoods carried a rhythm of their own. Children pedaled down sidewalks on banana seat bikes, their hair blowing in the wind, no helmets in sight. A scraped knee wasn't a tragedy, it was a badge of adventure. Parents didn't hover with constant worry, because the community itself acted like an extended family. The world felt smaller, safer, stitched together by trust. There were no buzzing cell phones in every pocket. If you wanted to reach your friends, you knocked on their door or shouted their name across the street. Summers stretched long, with pickup baseball games in empty lots and hide and seek after the sun went down. The night air was filled with the hum of cicadas, porch lights flicking on one by one, and the call of parents' voices signaling it was time to come home. Local businesses were the heart of this life. Diners where waitresses remembered your order. Corner stores with creaky floors where kids bought penny candy. The barber who asked about your family. The butcher who saved you the best cut. The mechanic who trusted you to pay him next week. Transactions weren't just about money. They were built on relationships. Trust was the currency, and in many ways, it was worth more than cash. Everyday actions that now feel impossible or even unsafe were once normal. A child waiting alone outside a store. A stranger offering a ride home. Neighbors leaving their doors unlocked, confident that the only visitor might be a friend dropping in. People believed in the unwritten rule that the village would watch out for its own. It's easy to look back now and wonder if that freedom was reckless. No seatbelts, no helmets, no security cameras. But in its absence was a feeling that has grown rare, a sense of belonging. The risks were real, but so was the connection. Life was less about caution and more about trust. That world wasn't perfect. It had its blind spots, its dangers hidden in plain sight. Yet for many who lived it, the memories carry a golden glow because it was the last time daily life felt unguarded, unmeasured, and unrecorded. A time when America truly felt like home. But as the decades rolled on, those easy freedoms began to collide with new rules and restrictions. Piling into the back of a station wagon, no seatbelts, no car seats, just kids sliding around while Dad took the turns. It was normal. Today, it would bring fines and even arrests. In the 1970s, the car was less of a cage and more of a moving playground. Families squeezed in shoulder to shoulder, windows down, wind whipping hair in every direction. Children sprawled across the back seat, sometimes stretched out to nap, sometimes leaning out the window to wave at passing cars. Babies sat on laps in the front seat, bouncing with every bump in the road. Pickup trucks were even more daring. Kids rode in the open bed, legs dangling as if the world were one big joyride. Seatbelt laws were either non-existent or rarely enforced, and few people thought twice about it. Cars had belts, but many tucked them away, considering them optional. Freedom meant movement, and movement wasn't meant to be restrained. What mattered most was getting everyone to the ball game, the drive-in, or Sunday picnic. Safety, at least by today's standards, came second to the simple thrill of the ride. Looking back, it's almost shocking. The thought of a toddler bouncing freely in the front seat or kids standing between the front seats while Mom drove would horrify most modern parents. Today's world is ruled by car seats, booster seats, and seatbelt checks. Police ticket parents for even minor violations, and entire industries exist to protect children on the road. What once symbolized normal family life now feels like evidence in a safety campaign. And yet, survival stories are everywhere. Many people remember growing up without a scratch despite years of unbuckled rides. It doesn't mean tragedy didn't happen. It did, and it was often devastating. But at the time, The dangers didn't dominate the conversation. What lingered instead were the shared moments, the games of I Spy from the back seat, the family sing-alongs, the way siblings fought for the window seat instead of worrying about seatbelts. The debate still stirs something deeper. Was it reckless freedom or simply a different way of living? Some argue those days built resilience and gave kids a sense of adventure. Others say it was only luck that kept so many safe. What can't be denied is how much things have changed. Where once parents were trusted to make their own decisions, the law now dictates every ride. The shift from freedom to safety wasn't just about cars. It reflected a wider cultural turn, where risk was no longer embraced but managed. The open road of the past closed in under new rules, reshaping what family life looked like on four wheels. And it wasn't just on the road freedom shaped how people smoked, ate, and lived in public. Airports, airplanes, restaurants, even hospitals. In the 1970s, smoking was everywhere indoors, outdoors, around kids, around strangers. Nobody thought twice. The haze of cigarette smoke was as much a part of public life as the sound of background chatter. Office meetings unfolded in clouds that drifted across long tables. Teachers lit up in the faculty lounge, their smoke slipping under the door and into the hallways. On airplanes, flight attendants offered cigarettes along with drinks, and passengers filled the cabin with a fog that clung to your clothes long after you landed. Even hospitals weren't immune. Patients smoked in their beds while doctors puffed away on break. Television played its part too. Before 1971, cigarette commercials dominated the airwaves. Smooth voices and glamorous images sold smoking as sophistication, freedom, and even health. Iconic campaigns like the Marlboro Man or You've Come a Long Way, Baby shaped not only habits but also identity. Lighting a cigarette wasn't just a choice. It was a statement. It meant you belonged to the rhythm of adult life. Cigarette vending machines sat in diners, bowling alleys, and hotel lobbies, offering packs as easily as candy bars. Teenagers slipped coins in without a second glance, and no one asked for ID. Smoking had no boundaries, and it crossed every age and social line. The smell was as common as fresh coffee or gasoline at the pump. Social status was often tied to the ritual. A cigarette in hand signaled coolness, independence, or authority. Celebrities and politicians smoked in public without backlash. Even in family homes, ashtrays sat on every coffee table, sometimes as decorative as the magazines beside them. Hosting guests meant offering a drink and a lighter. But slowly, the tide began to turn. The first bans crept in during the 1980s, spreading from airplanes to restaurants, from schools to workplaces. By the 1990s, smoke-free zones were the norm. What was once a mark of belonging became a mark of defiance and later, stigma. Ads disappeared. Warnings filled cigarette packs. And smokers moved from center stage to the margins, forced outdoors, huddling under awnings in the rain. The cultural shift was staggering. For those who lived through it, the memory of smoke-filled rooms feels almost surreal today. The idea of sparking a cigarette in a hospital or passing one to a friend on a flight seems impossible. What was ordinary turned into outlawed, as if a whole era had been sealed away with the haze. But smoking wasn't the only thing people could do freely. Alcohol laws were just as loose. In many states, the drinking age was 18 and enforcement was lax. Teenagers could stroll into a bar or buy beer at the corner store with barely a raised eyebrow. The 1970s were a different landscape when it came to alcohol. In some states, 18 was old enough to vote, enlist, and order a drink at the local tavern. Bartenders often didn't bother with IDs, and corner store clerks sold six-packs to young faces without hesitation. A fake ID wasn't always necessary. Confidence alone could get you through the checkout line. Cars, too, carried a different culture. An open beer between friends in the back seat, or even the driver's hand, wasn't too unusual. Coolers rattled in trunks, and long road trips meant passing cans along like snacks. Police were less likely to pull someone over for suspicion of drinking, and DUI enforcement was minimal compared to today's strict standards. The line between fun and danger was blurry, and most people didn't question it. School life reflected the looseness as well. At football games, beer cans sometimes dotted the bleachers. Proms and homecoming dances weren't immune either. Students sneaked in bottles with little effort, and adults often looked the other way. College parties spilled into neighborhoods, kegs rolling down sidewalks with laughter echoing into the night. Drinking wasn't a hidden rebellion. It was part of the social fabric. The cultural backdrop reinforced it. Beer ads targeted young adults with images of freedom, friendship, and fun. Commercials promised that a cold can meant belonging. Drinking wasn't just about alcohol, it was about being included. The ritual of raising a glass, even for those barely out of high school, was a way of stepping into adulthood. But change was brewing. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, drunk driving accidents captured national attention. Tragedies revealed the darker side of what had once been dismissed as harmless fun. Groups like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD, turned grief into activism, pushing lawmakers to tighten restrictions. Gradually, open container laws spread, ID checks grew strict, and the drinking age rose to 21 nationwide by the mid-1980s. The shift was dramatic. What once felt like freedom became risk, and what once was ignored became criminal. Parents who once shrugged at teenagers sipping beer grew fearful of consequences, both legal and personal. Bars that had casually welcomed young faces began turning them away. The culture of casual indulgence gave way to caution and control. It's a reminder of how quickly social norms can change. For those who lived it, the idea of teenagers freely buying beer or sipping in the back of a car seems almost unthinkable now. Yet not so long ago, it was just another part of American life. But if alcohol laws were loose, so were rules about where kids could go and what they could do. Latchkey kids. Unlocked doors. No cell phones. Children disappeared for hours, sometimes all day, and parents didn't panic. In the 1970s, childhood carried a freedom that feels almost impossible to imagine today. Kids walked themselves to school, often crossing busy streets or railroad tracks without an adult in sight. Backpacks slung over shoulders, shoelaces dragging. They blended into the flow of the neighborhood, trusted to find their way. Parents expected independence, and children delivered it, sometimes with scraped knees and sunburned faces, but also with a sense of confidence that only came from being on their own. Hitchhiking, too, was a familiar sight. Teenagers stuck out a thumb on the edge of the highway, hoping for a ride to the mall or the next town over. Strangers pulled over without suspicion, and most saw it as a practical way to get around. The dangers, though real, weren't talked about with the same urgency they would be decades later. At the time, it was simply another part of life. Playgrounds told the same story. Jungle gyms made of steel and concrete loomed high, with sharp edges and hard landings. Wooden seesaws cracked and splintered, merry-go-rounds spun at dizzying speeds, and monkey bars seemed designed more for risk than safety. Yet kids flocked to them, their laughter echoing across the park as they tested their limits. Falls and bruises were expected, not feared, and each tumble was considered a lesson in resilience. Evenings stretched long with no schedules, but the most natural one, the streetlights. As soon as the lamps flickered on, kids knew it was time to race home. Until then, they played freely kickball in the streets, hide and seek in the yards, or pick up basketball on cracked driveways. Parents didn't call or text to check in. They trusted that the kids would come back when it was time. That trust was the backbone of the community. The phrase, stranger danger, barely existed. While children were warned not to talk to people they didn't know, the constant fear that surrounds parenting today was less present. Neighbors were assumed to be allies, not threats. If a child wandered too far, there was usually someone nearby to guide them home. The village still held together, and children grew up inside its invisible safety net. By contrast, today's childhood looks structured, supervised, and carefully managed. Organized playdates replace spontaneous games. Car rides replace long walks. Cell phones track every move, and the idea of a child disappearing all day without contact feels alarming. What was once ordinary now seems unthinkable. And yet, for those who grew up in that era, the memories remain golden. There was danger, yes, but also freedom, a kind of freedom that shaped not just childhood but character. And while kids had wide freedom, adults carried a level of freedom too, especially when it came to the law. Buying fireworks, alcohol, or even a firearm often required little more than cash and maybe a smile. ID checks were rare. In the 1970s, the idea of showing identification for everyday purchases was far less common than it is today. A teenager could walk into a corner store and buy a pack of cigarettes without anyone asking their age. Beer often slipped across the counter to young faces without a second glance. Even fireworks, now carefully restricted in many states, were stacked in roadside stands and sold freely to anyone with pocket change. Firearms, too, were surprisingly easy to obtain. While some regulations existed, background checks were minimal or non-existent. In many parts of the country, you could walk into a sporting goods store, pick out a rifle or a shotgun, and walk out with it the same day. Paperwork was brief, and in some cases, optional. The assumption was simple. People could be trusted. That trust extended into nearly every corner of commerce. Transactions were quick, uncomplicated, and rarely questioned. Clerks didn't study IDs under bright lights, and bartenders didn't swipe cards through machines. Rules existed, but enforcement was casual, leaving much to the judgment of individuals. If you looked old enough or acted like you belonged, you were in. It was a system built less on regulation and more on community trust. Parents trusted that stores wouldn't take advantage of kids, and shopkeepers trusted that customers were who they said they were. Strangers weren't seen first as risks, but as people to be dealt with in good faith. Looking back, it feels almost shocking to realize how lightly controlled so many of these transactions were. The contrast with today is striking. Modern life is filled with checkpoints. Driver's licenses scanned, IDs scrutinized, background checks required, age verified by electronic systems. Buying alcohol or cigarettes without proof of age is almost impossible, and firearms are heavily regulated, often involving waiting periods, registration, and federal paperwork. Fireworks sales are monitored too, with limits on what can be sold and to whom. The shift reflects more than just new laws. It reflects a cultural transformation. Trust was replaced by verification, and personal judgment was replaced by standardized rules. Where once a handshake or a familiar face was enough, now a government-issued ID card is the gatekeeper. For those who remember the older ways, it can feel like two different worlds. The freedom of the past carried risks, but also a sense of personal responsibility. The safety of today carries security, but also a loss of that unspoken trust that once tied communities together. And beyond laws, there were the daily habits, things we hardly notice today that once filled every home. From riding in the back of pickup trucks to dogs roaming free in neighborhoods, the 1970s were filled with sights that would shock people today. It was common to see children piled into the bed of a pickup, legs swinging over the edge as the truck bounced down a country road. Nobody thought of seatbelts back there, and the wind in their hair felt like the essence of freedom. Parents didn't see recklessness, they saw normal life. It was a time when the joy of the ride outweighed the thought of what could go wrong. Neighborhoods carried a different rhythm too. Dogs wandered without leashes, moving from yard to yard like honorary residents. They greeted mailmen, chased kids on bikes, or stretched out in the middle of the street, unbothered by passing cars. These animals weren't seen as strays, but as part of the community, loosely belonging to everyone. Today, the sight would spark phone calls to animal control, but back then it was simply part of the backdrop. Helmets were rare as well. Children raced down hills on bikes with no protection, while motorcycles roared by with riders' hair streaming in the wind. A scraped elbow or broken arm was considered part of growing up. Cautionary rules hadn't yet reshaped play or adventure. The risks were real, but they were accepted as the price of freedom. Backyards carried their own set of customs that would raise eyebrows now. Families set off fireworks without permits, sometimes lighting up entire neighborhoods on summer nights. BB guns were common gifts for young boys, often fired at tin cans or sometimes, dangerously, at each other. Burning trash in barrels was another ritual, the smoke curling into the air as an ordinary part of life. Noise filled the spaces between houses. Teenagers tuned up cars in driveways, bands practiced in garages, and neighbors mowed lawns early in the morning without a second thought. Zoning laws and noise ordinances were minimal, and the sense of live and let live ruled. Complaints were rare because everyone seemed to accept that freedom came with a bit of inconvenience. Looking back, it's easy to see the dangers. Fires from trash burning, accidents from fireworks, injuries from unprotected rides, all were part of the picture. But for those who lived it, the memories are colored less by fear and more by the feeling of possibility. The world felt open, unsupervised, and full of small adventures hiding in plain sight. That openness, however, couldn't last forever. As lawsuits grew and safety campaigns spread, those habits became targets of lawmakers. Law by law, habit by habit, the everyday freedom of the 70s faded. By the 90s, America had become a different place. The unraveling began slowly. Each lawsuit that made headlines reminded the public of risks they once brushed aside. A playground injury could turn into a legal battle. A drunk driving accident became a rallying cry for tougher enforcement. Liability fears seeped into daily life, reshaping how businesses, schools, and families operated. Where once freedom was assumed, protection became demanded. Organizations like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD, gained power during the 1980s, channeling grief into reform. They pressed lawmakers for stricter laws, and soon states tightened rules on drinking and driving. What had been casual open containers in cars, teenagers buying beer suddenly carried serious consequences. The push for safety extended far beyond the roads, reaching into schools, neighborhoods, and homes. Federal regulations followed suit. Cars now required airbags, seatbelts, and crash tests. Workplaces adopted stricter safety codes. Fireworks, smoking, even backyard trash burning all came under closer watch. It wasn't just about preventing accidents. It was about reshaping culture around the idea that danger could and should be minimized. The better safe than sorry mindset replaced the old shrug of acceptance. Parents, too, shifted. The hands-off style of the 70s gave way to a more protective approach. Where children once wandered freely, they were now driven to playdates, signed up for organized sports, and monitored through new technologies. Stranger danger campaigns, Amber Alerts, and media coverage of rare tragedies deepened the sense that constant vigilance was necessary. Childhood freedom narrowed under a net of caution. Health risks also entered the spotlight. Studies linking smoking to cancer, poor diets to disease, and chemicals to long-term harm began to influence choices. The carefree habits of the past, from chain smoking to late-night snacking, were no longer seen as harmless indulgences, but as threats to longevity. The freedom to live as one pleased came into tension with the drive to live as long as possible. And yet, as all these changes unfolded, nostalgia grew. Many who came of age in the 1970s remembered the era not for its risks, but for its openness. They recalled a time when trust bound communities together, when children tasted independence, and when life felt less regulated and more real. Even as new laws promised safety, something was lost in the process: the sense that ordinary life didn't need constant oversight. America, by the 1990s, had traded its loose, free-for-all ways for a carefully managed order. It was safer, no doubt, but also more cautious, more watchful, more restrained. The memory of the old freedoms lingered like the scent of smoke on an old jacket, faint, but impossible to forget. And yet, the deeper truth is that the 1970s were never just about risk. They were about freedom. The 1970s may be gone, but the spirit of freedom that defined it still lingers in America's memory. It was never just about the lack of seatbelts or the haze of cigarette smoke in public places. It wasn't only about riding in the back of pickup trucks or leaving doors unlocked at night. At its heart, that era was about something larger, an unspoken belief that people could be trusted to find their own way. Risk wasn't denied, but it was accepted as part of living. Personal freedom meant more than rules on paper. It meant a child could roam until the streetlights came on without raising an alarm. It meant a neighbor could borrow a tool or walk into a diner without worrying about fine print or contracts. It meant that communities relied on each other, not systems, to keep life steady. That trust may have been imperfect, but it carried a kind of joy that can't be easily replaced. Over time, cultural values shifted. Safety became the priority, and laws grew thicker around daily life. Helmets, seatbelts, background checks, ID cards are all symbols of protection, and all meant to keep harm at bay. They worked in many ways. Accidents dropped. My health improved. Communities became more cautious, more careful, more shielded from danger. Yet something quieter slipped away. The ease of letting go, the comfort of believing the world around you would catch you if you fell. Nostalgia for the 1970s is less about the objects or the habits and more about the feeling. The smell of cut grass drifting through open windows, the sound of screen doors slamming as kids ran outside, the easy nods exchanged between neighbors, all of it spoke to a time when freedom was woven into daily routines. It was the sense that life was lived face to face, without constant filters, regulations, or digital traces. Laws shape identity, but freedom shapes memory. The America of the 1970s carved itself into the hearts of those who lived it, not because it was safer, but because it was freer. The memories glow not from perfection, but from possibility of the chance to live unguarded, unmeasured, and unafraid. Was it better then, or is it safer now? That question has no single answer, because every generation balances freedom and safety differently. But the longing for that open, unfiltered life remains. It whispers in old photographs, in family stories, in the way people smile when they recall their childhood streets. The past reminds us not only of what we lost, but of what we valued. Which of these 70s freedoms would you bring back? Share your thoughts in the comments below.